I used to think a military base was basically barracks, warehouses, vehicles, and a fence. Then I was given a problem that changed the way I looked at one. My name is Ethan Brooks, and as a logistics officer, I was asked to estimate what it would cost the government to build and operate a military installation from scratch, because I wasn't really calculating the cost of a military base. I was calculating the cost of building a small city, except this city needed to support thousands of people, heavy vehicles, communications, medical care, emergency services, training areas, warehouses, and possibly aircraft. I started with the land. I needed training grounds, vehicle storage, maintenance yards, security buffers, roads, and perhaps an airfield. So I imagined the government acquiring 40,000 acres, using the 2025 U.S. farm real estate average of about $4,350 per acre as a rough benchmark. 40,000 acres would come to about $174 million before any premium for location, negotiations, or special acquisition costs, and I had not built anything yet. Then came site preparation, surveying, clearing, grading, drainage, environmental work, soil preparation, fencing, and access roads. I assigned another $250 million. Now I was at roughly $424 million, and Camp Ridgway was still mostly dirt. Then came the roads. A major base cannot operate with one road through the front gate. I needed entrance roads for buses, fuel trucks, deliveries, convoys, and emergency vehicles. For a mixed network of internal roads, reinforced routes, parking areas, intersections, and some bridge work, I used a planning allowance of about $500 million for roughly 100 miles of base transportation infrastructure. Now I was approaching $1 billion, and the base still could not turn on a light, so I moved to electricity. I needed substations, transformers, cables, backup generators, emergency systems, and redundancy. I estimated roughly $300 million. Then I needed water for showers, bathrooms, kitchens, laundry, medical buildings, fire suppression, vehicle washing and maintenance. Treatment plants, pumping stations, pipelines, drainage, and wastewater systems added another estimated $400 million. Camp Ridgway was now approaching $1.8 billion, and almost none of that money had gone into the buildings people normally imagine when they hear military base. I had assumed the buildings would be the expensive part. Instead, preparing the land to support those buildings could consume billions before anyone moved in. Then I started housing people. Suppose Camp Ridgway needed to support 15,000 service members. I needed thousands of rooms. Every barracks needed beds, lockers, desks, bathrooms, showers, heating, air conditioning, fire protection, communications, laundry rooms, furniture, common areas, and security systems. Housing in barracks could realistically push toward another $1 billion. Modern U.S. military barracks projects can cost well into 9 figures once utilities, site work, common areas, and support spaces are included. Then came headquarters, classrooms, training centers, communications facilities, and secure offices. I assigned another $500 million. A substantial medical center, pharmacy, emergency treatment spaces, equipment, storage, and backup power could add around $400 million. I still needed fire stations, dining halls, commercial kitchens, refrigerated storage, warehouses, garages, maintenance shops, fuel storage, fitness facilities, checkpoints, perimeter systems, and equipment storage. If Camp Ridgway included aviation, the numbers climbed even faster. Runways, hangars, aircraft maintenance buildings, fuel systems, and support equipment could add billions more. By the time I finished my rough model, the base was approaching $5 billion before full operations even began. $5 billion was not the cost of running Camp Ridgway. It was the cost of opening it. The moment thousands of people arrived, the financial meter would start again. Electricity, water, food, salaries, fuel, medical care, repairs, waste removal, security, laundry, maintenance, and replacement supplies would consume money every day. I had started by asking how much it cost to build a military base. Now I understood that construction was only the entry fee. The real financial story began the morning Camp Ridgway opened its gates. The first morning Camp Ridgway became operational, I realized something uncomfortable. The expensive part was no longer construction. It was keeping thousands of people alive, working, fed, housed, and ready every day. I started with utilities. 15,000 service members, civilian employees, contractors, kitchens, offices, medical facilities, warehouses, workshops, and data systems all needed electricity. Then came water. Thousands of showers and toilets, laundry facilities running constantly, kitchens preparing meals, medical buildings, fire systems, vehicle washing. Even on a quiet day, Camp Ridgway would consume enormous amounts of electricity and water, so I built a simple estimate. If electricity, natural gas, water, sewage, and other utilities averaged around $8 million per month, that was roughly $96 million per year, more than $260,000 every day just to keep the lights on, water flowing, and buildings usable. Then came food. If 10,000 people ate an average of 3 government-supported meals per day, that meant 30,000 meals every day. If ingredients, storage, preparation, kitchen staff, equipment, cleaning, and waste averaged $12 per meal, I was already at $360,000 per day. That was more than $130 million per year. And food does not simply appear in a dining hall. I needed freezers, dry storage, loading docks, inventory systems, kitchen equipment, employees keeping the chain moving. Then came payroll. This category made every previous number look smaller. A base does not function because buildings exist. It functions because people operate them. Service members need pay and benefits. Civilian employees need salaries. Medical staff, mechanics, engineers, cooks, firefighters, technicians, cleaners, and drivers all represent recurring labor costs. For my simplified model, I assumed the combined personnel cost connected to a large installation could exceed $1 billion per year once military compensation, civilian payroll, benefits, and support staffing were included. That meant several million dollars were being committed every day before I purchased one spare tire or gallon of fuel. Then came healthcare. A large population creates treatment, prescriptions, examinations, emergency care, and medical supplies. Even with a medical center already built, doctors, nurses, technicians, medications, laboratories, and equipment maintenance all cost money. Then I moved to housing. Barracks do not remain new for long. Air conditioners fail, pipes leak, doors break, roofs need repair, furniture wears out. Washing machines stop working. If I assigned $100 million per year to housing repairs, building maintenance, grounds work, waste removal, janitorial services, and facilities support, that was another $274,000 per day. And I still had not touched vehicles, aircraft, training, ammunition, or major equipment. That was the second major expectation reversal in my assignment. I had assumed the expensive days would be the days when Camp Ridgway conducted a huge training exercise. But a military base burns money even when almost nothing dramatic is happening. People still get paid, buildings still consume electricity, food still arrives, trash still leaves, firefighters still have to be ready, doctors still have to be available, water still flows. Warehouses also need inventory, while uniforms, cleaning products, household supplies, replacement furniture, and office materials have to be replenished continuously. By the time I combined personnel, food, utilities, healthcare, housing support, sanitation, fire services, and routine operations, my rough model was already moving towards several million dollars per day. The point was simple. Camp Ridgway did not need a war, an emergency, or even a major exercise to become expensive. The base only needed to wake up. Then I opened the next section of my spreadsheet: vehicles, fuel, maintenance, and equipment. That was when the numbers became much larger. The next page of my spreadsheet covered vehicles and equipment. This was where Camp Ridgway stopped looking like a city and started looking like an industrial machine. I began with trucks and utility vehicles. A base this large needed trucks, buses, fuel vehicles, forklifts, ambulances, generators, recovery vehicles, and construction equipment. Then I added armored vehicles. With several thousand vehicles, the fleet itself could be worth billions, but buying the equipment was not the real problem. Keeping it operational was. Every vehicle needed inspections, tires, fluids, replacement parts, repairs, and scheduled maintenance. A truck sitting broken inside a garage was still an asset on paper, but operationally it was almost worthless. That meant mechanics, engineers, maintenance bays, diagnostic equipment, parts warehouses, and contractors. Then I moved to fuel. A civilian car might burn a few gallons a day. Camp Ridgway could have thousands of engines running. Trucks moved supplies, buses moved personnel, generators provided backup power, heavy vehicles trained. If aviation was part of the mission, the fuel line became even more serious. Aircraft could consume enormous quantities of fuel quickly, which meant storage tanks, tanker trucks, safety systems, and dedicated crews. In my rough model, ground vehicles and routine training could consume tens of millions of dollars in fuel each year. Add aviation, and that figure could rise dramatically. I had assumed old equipment would be expensive because it breaks. But new equipment can be expensive too because modern military systems are complicated. Sensors, secure communications, software, and specialized components all needed technicians and replacement parts. The more advanced the equipment became, the less useful a basic toolbox became. I needed specialists, test systems, and sometimes the original manufacturer. That contractor support could continue for years. Then I looked at aviation. If Camp Ridgway hosted aircraft, the financial scale changed again. An aircraft is not just a purchase. It requires crews, hangars, inspections, spare parts, tools, fuel, and support equipment. Every flight hour creates another maintenance obligation, so the true cost of an aircraft is not simply its purchase price. The real cost is keeping it safe and available for years. The same logic applied to armored vehicles, unmanned systems, and communications. Then I added IT. Thousands of people needed computers, secure networks, cybersecurity, software, backups, and technical support. Servers used electricity, hardware aged, software needed updates. Networks needed monitoring. Now I understood the maintenance budget. Camp Ridgway was constantly fighting deterioration. Engines wore down, tires disappeared, electronics failed, batteries died, software aged, parts became obsolete. Nothing stayed ready forever. Costs kept coming back again. So I built a simplified annual estimate. Fuel, spare parts, repairs, IT support, contractors, and maintenance could consume hundreds of millions per year. If aviation and large fleets were involved, the total could move toward $1 billion or more. Unlike construction, this spending never really ended. A building might be completed once. A vehicle had to be maintained again and again. That was what I had misunderstood. The government was not simply buying equipment. It was buying years of future obligations. Every new vehicle meant future fuel. Every aircraft meant future maintenance. Every computer meant future replacement. Every advanced system meant technicians, spare parts, training, and support contracts. By the end, I no longer saw Camp Ridgway as a collection of expensive objects. I saw a giant chain of recurring costs. And that raised the next question. If billions of dollars were constantly moving through this base, where exactly did all that money go, and who outside the military was getting paid? By this point, I had stopped thinking about Camp Ridgway as a military installation. Financially, it looked more like a giant spending network. Federal defense money reached the base, then split into dozens of directions: personnel, utilities, construction, food, fuel, maintenance, transportation, medical care, security, IT, training, repairs. And the deeper I looked, the more obvious one thing became. The military was not doing all of this work by itself. Private companies were everywhere. One company might repair barracks, another maintain air conditioning, another move cargo, supply food, or support secure networks. Even mowing grass could become a government contract. That changed the way I saw the base. Camp Ridgway was not only consuming government money, it was distributing that money into the private economy. So I built another simplified model. Suppose the base spent $2.5 billion per year on personnel, operations, maintenance, utilities, supplies, contractors, and local support. That would equal $6.85 million daily. Some of that money would go directly to service members and civilian employees. Some would pay national defense contractors. Some would go to regional construction, food, transport, repair, and service companies. And then a large part of it would keep moving. A service member received a paycheck and paid rent. A civilian employee bought groceries. A contractor hired local workers. A repair company purchased materials. A restaurant near the gate served more customers because thousands of people worked nearby. The same dollar could support several transactions after leaving the base. This was the part I had underestimated. I had assumed Camp Ridgway's economic impact ended at the perimeter fence. In reality, the fence was almost where the second economy began. The nearby town needed more housing, stores, restaurants, gas stations, repair shops, hotels, and transport because the base existed. Landlords benefited from steady demand. Construction companies built housing. Retailers hired more employees. The base created a stable concentration of customers with recurring income. But there was another side to that stability. A town that became too dependent on one military installation could also become vulnerable. If personnel numbers fell, contracts disappeared, or units moved elsewhere, Local businesses could suddenly lose customers, housing demand could weaken, restaurants could struggle, contractors built around one government client could lose revenue almost overnight. So Camp Ridgway created opportunity, but it also created dependence. Then I looked at contractors more closely. Government contracts can be enormous, but large contract value does not mean large profit. A company might receive a $50 million maintenance contract and still keep only a small percentage after labor, materials, insurance, equipment, and compliance costs. That was another expectation reversal. Billions moving around the base did not mean everyone touching that money was becoming rich. Most of the money was already committed to costs. The real question was who could deliver the required service efficiently enough to keep a margin. By now, I could see Camp Ridgway as a complete financial system. The government funded it, military and civilian personnel operated it, contractors supplied and maintained it, local businesses absorbed spending from the people connected to it, and taxpayers ultimately supported the chain. But Camp Ridgway was still fictional. I had built estimates to understand the mechanics, not to claim every real base spent exactly the same way. So I wanted one final test. I needed to compare my imaginary installation with a real American base large enough to show what this system looked like at full scale. That brought me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and once I started looking at its size, Camp Ridgway suddenly did not feel exaggerated at all. By the time I reached Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I finally had a real installation large enough to test everything I had learned from Camp Ridgway. Fort Bragg is not just big by military standards, it is a city-sized economic system. Official military information lists roughly 48,775 active-duty soldiers, plus thousands of civilian employees, contractors, and more than 70,000 active-duty family members. That immediately changed the scale of my spreadsheet. At Camp Ridgway, I had imagined 15,000 service members. Fort Bragg was supporting more than 3 times that number before I counted families, civilians, contractors, and visitors. Then I looked at the land. The installation covers roughly 250 square miles. That is enough space for housing, headquarters, training areas, medical facilities, warehouses, roads, airfields, maintenance buildings, and utilities. Every part of that footprint has a financial consequence. Roads deteriorate, buildings need repairs, power has to be delivered, water has to be treated, medical facilities need staff, vehicles need maintenance. Thousands of people need food, housing support, transportation, and administration. Then I looked at the economic impact. Recent reporting has placed Fort Bragg's annual contribution to the surrounding economy at more than $8.8 billion. That figure is not the same thing as the base's operating budget. Economic impact measures how spending connected to the installation spreads through payroll, contracts, local purchases, housing, businesses, and secondary activity. It does not mean Fort Bragg receives an $8.8 billion check every year and spends it directly, but the number showed me how enormous the financial ecosystem had become. If I divided $8.8 billion by 365 days, I got roughly $24 million in economic activity connected to the installation every day. That was not a precise daily operating cost, but it gave me a sense of scale. Every morning Fort Bragg opened its gates. Thousands of paychecks, contracts, purchases, repairs, deliveries, and services supported an economy beyond the fence. Military families needed homes. Workers needed stores and restaurants. Contractors hired employees. Hotels served visitors. Then I returned to the question that had started my assignment. What does it actually cost to keep a place like this operating? There was no single public number I could honestly label as Fort Bragg's exact daily operating cost, because funding is spread across personnel, operations, construction, healthcare, contracts, units, and other federal programs. So instead of pretending I had a perfect number, I built a range. If an installation and its assigned organizations consumed several billion dollars of direct federal spending in a year, a simplified $4 billion annual model would equal about $11 million per day. At $6 billion, the figure would be more than $16 million per day. And most of this money would not be paying for dramatic moments. It would be paying for readiness, people, maintenance, utilities, facilities, logistics, healthcare, transportation, training, and the ordinary systems that have to work before anything extraordinary can happen. That was the final expectation reversal for me. A military base can look quiet and still be financially active every second. By the end of my assignment, I no longer saw Fort Bragg as a collection of soldiers, buildings, and equipment. I saw a government-funded economic system operating at the scale of a major city. It can consume billions of dollars, but those billions do not simply disappear. They become salaries, contracts, repairs, construction projects, local purchases, and business revenue. Camp Ridgeway had taught me how expensive a base could become. Fort Bragg showed me why. The real cost of a military base is not the fence, the barracks, or even the equipment. It is the permanent obligation to keep an entire city-sized system ready every single day. That was the point.